Namaste, ladies and gentlemen, and you are watching my podcast channel. I'm here with a very special guest, a colleague, and a friend indeed, who is Daniel Stein. And Daniel Stein has very gracefully agreed to join me on my podcast. Daniel is a professor at OP General Global University, in whose precincts we are sitting currently, and I enjoy the colleagueship of this gentleman, therefore. He is a professor of international law and maritime law, and he is also a partner in crime in one of my latest books on Adam's Bridge and Ram Setu. And his photographs from Rameshwaram have graced some of the pages in my book Ram Setu. So any of you who has read my book, you will find Daniel Stein's pictures therein. So I'm indeed very grateful to Daniel. And there's some news that we might talk about today. Daniel is heading for greener pastures, or should it be bluer seas, bluer oceans? And well, with a maritime law professor, you can always expect that. But we'll get into that. Daniel Stein is is a person of multiple talents and interests. He wears many hats, quite literally. He is generally very, sharply dressed. You don't see him in his hat at the moment. He's currently dressed in a Tulane sweatshirt, but Daniel is a person of very varied interests as well. You'll always find some of the most quality books on rare literature. He travels the Himalayas, he travels the seas and the oceans, as we have already touched on. So, Daniel, over to you. How would you like to describe yourself in this podcast today?
I'm definitely a law professor.
Which you are.
That is the main one. And I don't know. Having a focus on literature, I think having some sort of interdisciplinary awareness, some sort of, and this is one of the things that I'm struggling with too, is that to go from Jindal, where I've been teaching torts, international law, environmental law, my maritime law elective, a comparative law elective, I have sort of these disparate interests around the law. To go somewhere where I'm going to be focused solely on maritime law. And I'm sort of always fighting this generalist role where I feel like I have some sort of idea or input on everything, and I'm so jealous of these like specialists who's like, this is your guy for tax law. Oh, you have a problem with tax law, you need to talk to him. Oh, you have a problem with family law, this is the person to talk to.
Right.
And developing that, some of that I'm only a JD, I don't have a PhD, so I don't have that like specific degree of like interest in something. I'm obviously a maritime law specialist, but there's a lot of stuff that I have. I feel like growing up, when I did, gave me access to the best parts of the internet before it started to get bad recently, and the capacity to do self-learning and to, I am very grateful where I am today, thanks in a big part to Tulane Law. And number two, I would like to thank the Queens Public Library. I mean, this ability to just sort of learn on my own and be on my own has been a big one. But I wanted to surprise you with something because I'm just perusing your podcast. I know the role of poetry and of poems in so much of your work. So I brought my favorite poet, who is one of the most famous figures of the 21st century, but not known as a poet. But it is, of course, the translated works of Pablo Picasso.
Oh, interesting.
Many people don't know that Picasso was also a poet.
I did not know this.
And these, he wrote, I think, mainly in Spanish, but a little bit in French. And only recently the volume came out in English. And this is such an interesting sort of surrealist diary of his, where he has dated entries from all throughout 1935 until 1943. So throughout the Spanish Civil War, throughout the outbreak of World War II, And he writes, and so I have my 2 bookmarks in, and so I can read the poem from December 4th, 1935.
Why don't you? And this is an absolute pleasure, and I'm indeed stunned to see Pablo Picasso, and that too, because I knew Daniel as an enthusiast in the history of sciences, in the history of literature, history of philosophy, and now it turns out he's also a poet of sorts, and he's reading from Pablo Picasso, who we've only known as a painter. Why don't you go ahead?
And I got this before. I was lucky enough to go to the Picasso Museum this summer in Paris. Had a wonderful time there. But I picked up this before for a couple of reasons. So today's still the 4th, right? No, today's the 6th. So let's read the 6th of December. 6th of December looks a little long, so maybe I should stick with the 4th.
What about 5th?
5th is also a little long. Let me just do the 4th.
All right.
And to give some context, I mean, this is written in 1935 during the Spanish Civil War. Franco is collecting and amassing power. He is many of the later poems, and I was going to read one from 1937 that is sort of very specifically about Franco's rule, but they are graphic. They are sort of, I don't know exactly. I think he is not not quite in the Cubism area with his painting. But I'm just going to read it. 4th December, 1935. When the street soaks bread in the blood, the lamb pisses away on the bullfighter's dress, and the bull ends up wearing the wings of a horse. And they sweep up a rein that the mules left behind and forgot when they gave a last tug on the rope in the well. And as only seems natural, tangled it up with thread from a spider that hangs from the tip of one tit to the other, the acrobat lady traverses it, butterfly wings open wide, and with thousands of blindfolded eyes, minus one that's reading what's written, with light bulbs high up in the sky and the tambourine tapping the name of the rose that makes his hand shake and that casts them over the eyes of the prisoner, just when the firing squad shoots a volley that lights up the night and excites it, bespangled with many small flags.
Wow. That's one paragraph.
It's very intense stuff into
Very intense.
sort of what he was going
Very
through
intense.
during the Spanish Civil War from 1935 to 1943 as World War II was breaking out.
Deeply majestic. It's
Yes.
incredibly majestic.
And sort of a straight line to the,
Yes.
bulls that he's painting. He's very, bulls are the major figure throughout much of his artwork. And to see it reflected in a lot of the poetry is pretty fantastic. And so a lot of these I haven't read. I turn to it for inspiration, and we'll read, a couple days that match up with where we are now. But a nice poem to start off.
I mean,
It was a surprise, so I wanted to get his
I am
reaction
indeed.
on camera.
If I don't look surprised, then maybe I don't look the part. I'm a bad actor, but I'm indeed extraordinarily surprised, both by my friend Daniel's new avatar and so of Pablo Picasso's. I think we need a few more today. Before I invite Daniel to read a few more poems by Picasso's, I would like to take the opportunity to sort of throw a stunning question at him as a retaliation. What do you have to say to our institutions, to this new state structure, as it were, that has become created, wherein we are disliking the humanities, we are institutionalizing a kind of apathy for literature, for poetry, particularly Shakespeare. He was a white man in 16th century, 17th century Britain, but he was also a very poor man, and he wrote, he wrote just to keep alive and to keep a very, very big family alive. And I'm not getting into his personal life, but he did not have a very happy personal life either. So Shakespeare aside, India's Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore aside, in general, there's been this, the specter of apathy towards poetry, because poetry looks very abstract to people. There's literature is not meaningful for students in the law school, medical schools, engineering schools, and even indeed schools of humanities. And here we have a professor of maritime law, international law, reading Picasso with so much excitement. What do you have to tell us? How do we redress ourselves?
That's an interesting question. I think literature sort of stands at the contrast between solitude and community. And I think its power is bridging that gap. So much of my reading and the literature that I processed was during a months-long depression that I went through, where I spoke to very few people and I read a lot of books. And one of the things that was very helpful for processing that was being able to relate to other people who have happened to read these same couple of books. And it's not just books, but it is also theater. I wish I could remember where this article appeared in a Harper's Magazine about the role that ancient Greek theater was playing on. Gosh, I'm going to mess this up, so I'm just going to make it up. I'm going to say that it was on the bases, military bases, for families it was either people who had lost people in the military. It was something grief related. And there was such a loneliness, sorrow feeling that was so pent up and was able to come out in this realization that these characters were experiencing the same thing, were processing the same thing. I mean, the plays of ancient Greece, of Shakespeare, were relevant at the time because the characters process real emotions. They have real situations that occur between them and deal with human problems. I mean, they also, retell the history in a way that is necessary for understanding who the kings are and why they are kings. When not everyone is literate, not everyone is able to read books, so there's an important history part to it. But this communal experience of these emotions, of which people experiencing grief in ancient Greece is the same as people experiencing grief in the Shakespearean time, is going to be the same as people experiencing grief today. And whether you are reading the play and seeing the characters doing it, or sitting in the audience and seeing the characters dealing with it, you can read it and process it by yourself and feel not alone. You could be in this audience and see the characters going through this and realize that other people in the audience have lost family members to the war, have lost someone special to them, and have this release of grief where you no longer feel as alone. And so there's this, like, on the one side, you have this solitude where what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to read a book. I have access to, don't steal and download books, but you have access to steal and download any book that's ever written. Pay your authors, please. But you are also more connected in a way through those books, through the feelings that those books convey, to realize that you are not alone, through the other people who have read them. And I would add even one more layer to that. So much of the best literature that I have read, I wanted to read for a long time and waited until I was in the right location to read it. I read Master and Margarita while I was in Moscow. I read the Kalevala while I was in Finland. I read Sleepwalkers by Herman Brock when I was in Berlin, although he was not a Berlin guy. When I was in Germany, I came to India and I read Midnight's Children. There's this power of the literature to sort of bring, I've read much more since, but I think to bring a connection with the location where you are as well.
I think that's a deeply layered response. And again, you almost started talking like a literary critic now. And you've also sort of taken us into a brief detour of psychoanalysis and catharsis, which is a very, very meaningful experience, not just for sharing grief and joy and delight, but it's also a deeply spiritualizing experience. So as you put it so beautifully, literature stands at the cusp between solitude and society. It also stands at the cusp between spirituality and sociality, or the communal experience of grief and joy. But this isn't about my views, it's about your experiences. And you, as somebody who has such very deep and richly layered experiences of bringing literature into the classroom, is there anything that you would like to suggest institutions that are nowadays? In India, we are extremely interdisciplinary, and we in India nowadays we are extremely interdisciplinary, and we have students from diverse backgrounds, and indeed faculty from diverse backgrounds. So there are classrooms where we are teaching something as specific as, let's say, the maritime law and its implications in the Indian Ocean, and then there are classrooms where we are teaching something as broad and wide spanning as English 1, for example, the subject that I teach, which includes anything from Shakespeare to Abhigyan Shakuntalam to 21st century literature, Midnight's Children included. So when we have such contrasting disciplines at hand, how should we look at literature? How do we address this fear that literature has, it induces in people, some professors included? And my second question to you, a related question to you, would be, I mean, what would you suggest that we do to our pedagogy? Is there something that we can change in our pedagogy? Is there a kind of stigma attached to discourses of catharsis, sharing of grief, sharing of happiness, the personalization of literature or any study material? Is that missing in our classrooms, you think?
So I'll take the first one while I think about the second one, even though I feel bad in answering because it's one of the projects that I never got around to finishing. But
it's all because I'm seeking revenge on you, because you brought Pablo Picasso on the table and you read poetry from that.
The first one. So when I was in law school, I was an extern in the Arctic at the Arctic Center at the University of Lapland in Rovaniemi, which has a very strong connection with Jindal. Our former law school dean received his doctorate there. There's 3 or 4 other professors who've gotten LLMs there. And when I was there, I mean, this is why I'm a Jindalist, because I met a Jindal person when I was there. And when I was there, I read several finished books. I did this whole Arctic literature tour de force. I mean, maybe I can add these in the comments, but Norwegian, Swedes, Icelandic authors who've won the Nobel Prize. I mean, major classic novels. Yeah. I mean, Halldór Laxness from Iceland is famous for several novels. I would recommend starting with Independent People, and then Iceland Fell, and then World Light, which he's maybe most famous for, but is a little weird these days. Knut Hamsun is probably Norway's most, and I really enjoyed Growth of the Soil, even though I think he's most famous for Hunger, and he's also a little bit of a questionable character for his politics later in life, and the role of this Arctic literature had a very profound impact on me while I was there, sort of not just in the sort of, I'm going to say, nation building aspect of it, but the different, I want to say, texture, ways of appreciating and understanding the nature of it, things about the environment that I might not have noticed unless I had read about them, and unless I had read about them in those places. And then when I was here at Jindal, some of the professors from the Arctic Center got in touch with an organization in Kathmandu called ECMOD and put together an interpolar conference and had a bunch of Arctic scientists, lawyers, I'm going to say philosophers. I think there were only one or two, but coming from the Arctic to Kathmandu to sort of work on this idea that the Himalayas are the third pole, North Pole, the South Pole, and the third pole. And so the part of the project was run by a wonderfully smart man named Kamal Hussain, who's at the Arctic Center as the head of the Northern Institute of NIEM. Oh gosh. He'll forgive me for forgetting the acronym. And I proposed this talk on this polar novel. And that was, so I began looking for these sort of these Himalayan novels that sort of had this similar flavor, right? We're bringing together this sort of scientific community about glaciers and permafrost and about living through these conditions. There was a lot of indigenous rights of people who are living in, these small communities, these historic communities who've lived in these places for so long at the edge. The sort of legal rights that exist in the environmental situations of the two. And I sort of started this project to read some of these Himalayan novels and sort of say, how can we draw these comparisons? What are the comparisons here? How can we read them in the same context? The same way that the science can be cross-boundary, to have this literature. And I sort of had got most of the way through a syllabus that was sort of focused on polar literature and the law. Some of these novels have legal settings. The one I shared with you, the Badra Rai, there's a carnival today, has a whole subplot about a labor dispute on a tea plantation that they go to court about, and they have a big strike, and there's a nice little legal story there. And there was Iceland's Bell is sort of about an Icelandic gentleman who is forced by Denmark to steal a bell off a historic Icelandic church in order to go so that resources can be used for the Danish war efforts. And so it's all about Icelandic society protecting him from his refusal to do this. And you have a couple of very silly legal scenes. And so I was trying to sort of compare at least the legal, I have to stick to this legal bit, but to sort of bring in this polar connection in literature to say, you don't have to read all of Independent People, although you should. It's a wonderful book, but just, a chapter here and there can sort of see, you're growing up in South India, it's 35, 40 degrees every day, but how do we experience the Arctic? How do you even learn about it? How can you even, be aware that such a thing exists and people are living in, parkas all the time? So I unfortunately never completed it, but maybe it's still out there. It can still happen. And so that is would be my answer to the first one. So as to the second question, though, I think, and there's this thing with law school as well, where I teach a lot of first-year students, and with this realization that they're going to graduate and eventually could be arguing cases and have to get into this mindset where they are maybe not a lawyer yet, not an advocate yet, but they can at least step into the shoes and play one. And maybe this is a continuation of the first answer, but this way of getting outside of yourself and your own psyche, which especially when you're a college student can be overwhelming with what you are dealing with in many ways, by inhabiting the character in a play. And I was never that good at memorizing lines, but I know many people are able to memorize lines. And this is such an important skill in life, to be able to find a play with a certain number of characters, and everyone, even if you are reading just one role or two, you have to read the whole play to sort of understand the context and how you are playing it, and to put yourself in the mindset of someone else, how you're going to deliver a line, how you're going to act in a scene. And so maybe it's not the literature where you're reading one book, which can have a lot of characters, it can have very few characters, but I'm having there be some more plays where where you're not just reading, you are participating in a way where you have to read to understand the context, because you yourself are going to be stepping into one of the roles. And that role might be of someone from a different country, of a different gender, of a different whoever, to just be able to step outside yourself for a second, which in and of itself can be a very radical concept for a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, and providing a safe space for that opportunity, right? It's not, I guess we have a couple new performing arts spaces now. We do have a couple brand new stages and auditoriums, but to just do it in the classroom, no one is filming it. You're just doing it to, say that you have understood the context of the material to put on this play, gives you a deeper understanding than if you were trying to just, read through whatever else it is that you're trying to read through. I don't know. That's I haven't really considered that question, so it's just my thoughts.
Yeah, so I think there are lots of very interesting thoughts packed in there, and lots of very interesting experiences. Apart from the fact that I'd like to say that I think you're talking about, in particularly in the second response, you're talking about how there's a literature empowers us to undergo a depersonalization, a kind of a out of self experience, not out of body, which is very much in vogue these days, but out of self, out of the egotistical identity that you have. And I think therefore lawyering becomes a kind of representation of human experience, rather than only the representation of people's material bodies or their identities and so on. So that's really interesting. You're almost taking lawyering to the edifice of philosophy, indeed even a spiritual exercise. I wanted to say something more mundane, though. I don't have such a rich experience of Norwegian clients and literatures, but last year I visited the Faroe Islands, and I was stunned to hear a fact, at least two facts, apart from many others that stunned me, was that the Faroe Islands which is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but not really part of they are not represented by the Parliament of Denmark. So they have the oldest Parliament house in Europe. The Vikings built it almost 1,000 years ago, around 1050. But what was more interesting from maybe our viewers' point of view would be that there are Keralan boats, Malayali boats, Kerala manufactured vessels, which were purchased by the Danish government for the Faroe Islands back in 1970s and 80s. And I was trying to find some kind of let's say a resonance between the implications of the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, as it applies in the Faroe Islands and as it applies in, let's say, the Indian Ocean. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe you can tell us more about the UNCLOS, but I did not find any deep resonance. What I saw that the Faroe Islands is a very straightforward case of almost any, Icelandic, Norwegian territory trying to assert its independence from the hegemony of the European Union, and their rights about fishing, and they want an independent territory, and so on. They want to maintain their autonomy. So it seemed like a very straightforward case. But what struck me most was this very uncanny connection between material connection, not ideological, between India and the Faroes. Anyway, digressions aside, so you have taken us into this very, very challenging territory of how Norwegian politics and topography actually resonates with Himalayan topography, Himalayan politics. And I think this is something that I'm absolutely sure historians of geography, historians of geopolitics, historians of culture studies like myself would be really, really interested to pursue. I haven't ever thought of it that way. Norwegian climes, as people would know, are both alpine and oceanic. So they are a mixture of both, whereas the Himalayas are landlocked. Mm, I think it is time that we head towards some more, challenging and more contemporary topic. Because just before we started this conversation, before we started recording, Daniel was sharing. He was about to share some of his experiences of being a college student in America. And I mean, why don't you take us forward? What happened then? When was this? And what is that key incident that you mentioned to me that sort of changed the axis of the world, as it were?
I mean, the major event to me as a college student in the U.S. was the events of September 11th, and this was
9/11.
Yeah, which now I have to say the year, it was so long ago. I mean, it was 2001.
Yeah.
And it was such a shock to an America that had lived in peace and prosperity for a decade or two, at least during my lifetime. I mean, there were, I guess, several minor skirmishes in the Gulf. There was the NATO bombing campaign of Yugoslavia in the 90s, but was at least for myself, a major defining moment for a college student to have something happen that changes the topography of the country, that changes the direction of the country in such a drastic way. And it is also, I mean, interesting because it was because I was not in the majority, because I was not swept up by the tide. I was against the militarism. I was against the war in Iraq. I was against and I remember how even, a week later, there being one vote in the House against the authorization of military force against Afghanistan by the very courageous Barbara Lee, and how this sort of set up a counterculture in the U.S. that I think was dormant in many ways since the 60s, which is, way before my time, but was defining in the way not where it gave me purpose in saying I am going to, join the army and sign up and send me to Iraq, send me to Afghanistan. We've got to find the guys who've done this, but in the opposite direction. In the opposite direction, and then from graduating college, within 3 years of graduating, I was working in D.C. for a member of the Senate, where I worked for 4 years, and got to see a lot of things that I did not like and made me want to not work there anymore. And
so you, just to summarize, and this is very, very crucial because you are saying all this as if you are consuming staple food, but you were against the retaliation, and I remember watching this incident on television, and as far as I could see and hear, I was in Calcutta, and as much as however long I could, visualize and assess, people wanted retaliation in India. People wanted America to retaliate against who we did not know.
Yeah.
It was a virtual abstract then, but this was the sentiment in India, or at least the city where I was. And you are saying you were opposed to retaliation, and you saw that there was one vote against the retaliation, and you then joined Washington D.C. and you worked for a senator, no less, and there you witnessed what?
I mean, this was I was there from, we won our election in 2006. So I got to DC January 2007.
Right.
And so we had the last 2 years of Bush, and I was there for the first 2 years of Obama. And that, and part of the coalition, because 2006 was a major blue wave election. There were Democrats elected in seats that had not elected, 2008 as well. And much of that was to be able to pass resolutions stopping or withdrawing troops from Iraq, ending America's military involvement in Iraq. I mean, that war, which, 2001 went from, we need some troops in Afghanistan because, and this is, a now multi-generational problem with Taliban forces, versus we need to invade Iraq again, became a very, I would say, political magnet for a lot, and that shifted a lot of polls towards Democrats, people who were willing to say, we need to go into Afghanistan. I don't know if we need to go into Iraq, but I trust George Bush. Slowly ran out. I mean, there were a couple of other events. There was, of course, Hurricane Katrina and the response to Hurricane Katrina, which I can't imagine having made that much impact in Indian media at the time, but it was a very big story in the U.S. and was, of course, a very big story later when I went to New Orleans for 10 years after. But that was for organizing and being part of something, going from this counterculture of 2001, 2002 to taking a congressional majority in 2006 and then getting Barack Hussein Obama elected president in 2008 was sort of a major deal. I mean, we are so far beyond it at the time, but it was quite an achievement.
No, indeed. Especially from where you are seeing the world, I think I'm sure of what you're saying, and especially since you were watching American politics also from inside the congressional spaces, from the Senate itself. I now want to ask you, what is your impression of the evolution that has taken place in American politics since then, since Obama's first term? And what do you think of the Indian space? What kind of evolution have you experienced? Because you, as long as you've been in India, you haven't been in situ. You have been traveling all over the place. Rameshwaram. You recently went to Ajmer. You've traveled to the Himalayas.
And Arup too. I mean, Arup is probably the backwaters is probably the coolest thing that I've seen. I would love to chat more about that.
Well, why don't you?
Maybe I will start with that. And if I was a professional, if I could write any book about India, it would be maybe similar to what you have written on Ram Setu, but about the canals of Alleppey. And when I was there, asking people, how long have these been there? Who built them? Where is how did this engineering happen? Who decided to make these planes here? Who decided to make these roads here? It's such an incredible marvel of engineering. And how old is it?
They don't know.
I mean, there might be people who know, but I have not been able to find. I did, cursory amount of internet research, and this level of engineering, this level of dam work that might be hundreds of years old, and because there are ancient structures that are built up on these levied embankments, was so incredible to experience. I would not make the comparison to Norway. I would make the comparison to the Netherlands, to go to the Netherlands and be like, oh, the Dutch, they're so brilliant with their dams and their dikes. Oh, they're so able to, Amsterdam's, all of these connected dams that have made this beautiful, that dug out this terrain and made this city, this beautiful city. And then to go to Alpi and experience this, where it felt like...
So you are anthropomorphizing, you're suggesting that there is human agency in the creation of the backwaters. Of course, you are saying there's a collaboration between nature and human agency.
I think I would love to write a book about it. I think I would love even more to read a book about it. I think that would be a lot to write about. I just, the 2 days there on one of the little boats, going through, seeing the birds, seeing the fish, seeing all the people who live there, hearing the churches, hearing the we were boating down one canal, and there was some loud music playing, El Subramaniam, just violin ragas, and it was incredible. And how old was it? Where did it come from? Is it there's some. Was it there to begin with, and then what is the impact of the humans on that? It was marvelous to behold, and was not. So if you have a good book about the history of the Alpi canals, please send it my way. I would love to read it. And if you are an enterprising archaeoanthropologist, what is even the field of that? Then what a place to have to go and do a research visit and be stuck for a couple of months, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of worse places to go. But I think, I've seen a lot of cool stuff around India, but that is probably
one of the coolest, right?
Number one for me, yeah.
Okay. Do you think it's time for another Pablo Picasso poem?
I can give you the one that is the one that got me to find this book, where I saw this posted in some internet space in must have been 2016. At that point, the comparison between our, current president and the Generalissimo, Il Duce, were not Il Duce, sorry, Franco, Generalissimo, different guy, were, pretty, they were strong. So someone had posted this one to the internet, and I said I need to order the whole book. And this is 15th to 18th June 1937. It is called The Dream and Lie of Franco. Owl, fandango, escabeche, swords of octopus of evil omen, furry dish rags, scalps afoot, in middle of the skillet, bare balls popped into a cone of codfish sherbet, fried in scabies of his oxen heart, mouthful of marmalade of bedbugs of his words, silver bells and cockle shells and guts braided in a row, a pinky in erection, not a grape and not a fig, commedia dell'arte of bad weaving and smudged clouds, cosmetics of a garbage truck, the rape of Las Meninas, cries and outcries, casket on shoulders crammed with sausages and mouths, rage that contorts the drawing of a shadow that lashes teeth nailed into sand, the horse ripped open top to bottom in the sun, which reads it for the flies, who tack a rocket of white lilies to the knots, spliced in the sardine-heavy nets, lamp of lice where dog is, and of knots of rats and hideouts in a palace of old rags, the banners frying in the skillet, twist in black of ink sauce, spilled in drops of blood that gun him down, The street soars to the clouds, its feet bound to a sea of wax that makes its gut rot, and the veil that covers it is singing, dancing mad with sorrow. A flight of fishing poles, allegory and allegory of the moving van, first-class interment. Broken wings spinning in the spider web of dry bread, and clear water, a paella made of sugar and a velvet that paints a whiplash on its cheeks. The light blocked out of the eyes before the mirror that make monkey shines the chunk of nougat, and the flames that gnaw itself the lips around the wound. Cries of children, cries of women, cries of birds, cries of flowers, cries of wood and stone, cries of bricks, cries of furniture, of beds, of chairs, of curtains, of casseroles, of cats, and papers, cries of smells that claw themselves as smoke that gnaws the neck, of cries that boil in cauldron, and the rain of birds that floods the sea, that eats into the bone and breaks the teeth, biting the cotton the sun wipes on its plate, that Borse and Bank hide in the footprint left embedded in the rock.
Wow, and that's first of all.
Well, just to show, I mean, I know the breaks can be very important in poetry.
Yeah.
So just to see that this is a block of text. I mean, it's not like
so Daniel read that with remarkable passion. It was beautifully read. But if you look at the passage that Daniel is trying to show you, it's very Emily Dickinson-esque. It's apart from, it does not contain the ellipses of Emily Dickinson. It contains so many M dashes, and it's translated from Spanish and or French, as Daniel wanders in the beginning. But
there are whole unbroken pages of text.
So these are not even paragraphs. These are actually images stacked up together with the use of M dashes, and it just goes to show how a painter sees the world in fragmented images stacked together. There is no narrative, but there is tremendous weight in these paragraphs. So the weight of images and tremendous meaning.
It's sort of impressionist diary.
Impressionistic, and it does not. Do you think there's a connection between these images, or does it trouble us with the sheer disjointedness?
You will need some art historians for that. I
suppose.
I could have gone through I should have brought this to the Picasso Museum and matched up the dates. That would be such a cool project. Maybe after I finish my polar literature project and my history of the Albi backwaters project, I will get right on it.
I am the person who studied English literature in college and university, and nowadays I write books on what can be best described as history or cultural history for a living, and I have conversations on the history of science and history of quantum mechanics, and here are you, a lawyer of maritime law, international law, talking about this painter and a poet now, Pablo Picasso, and talking about literature. Well, I don't know how to end this conversation, because this is supposedly not wanting to be ended, and I'm very sure that when you are headed to Malta finally, so now I've disclosed that's where Daniel is going. Would you like to talk about that? How you ended up in Malta?
So this is a funny story, and I might ask you to cut it, but
well, I will not cut it.
So when I was in law school,
yeah,
I had law school in the U.S. is 3 years, and the first summer, which means you have 2 summers. The first summer, I went so my school does a series of summer programs. They have a maritime law summer program that they do on the island of Rhodos in Greece. And then they do alternative dispute resolution one in Berlin. And the Rhodos one is the last 2 weeks of May, and the Berlin one is the last 2 weeks of July. And so for the 7 weeks in between, that's when I was in the Arctic. So I went from Greece to the Arctic to Berlin. And then the second summer that I was there from Tulane, I went to London.
Okay.
I was an intern at the International Maritime Organization, the UN agency focusing on maritime affairs. And it was a wonderful experience. I also visited the Sherlock Holmes house when I was there. Obviously, I had to go see Baker Street. I did that on my birthday, actually. And there was, it was the championship, I think, of the French Open. And so the pub that day was showing, I'm going to say it was Federer Nadal. It might have been Djokovic, but there was like an incredible 5-set tennis match that was happening on the day. It was like all the rage.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, French Open, it might have been Wimbledon, but very big. Anyway, I was at the IMO and had this wonderful experience. I mean, to be doing so much of maritime law is private. It is, you are selling something that needs to go on a ship from one continent to another continent, and there is a dispute because it does not show up in time, or it gets damaged, or the ship sits at the port for too long. I mean, the carrying cost is known as freight. If it sits at the port for too long, it is called demurrage. Most of maritime law, private maritime law, is freight and demurrage. But to be doing public maritime law, of which is more for academics, is, I mean, you're at the IMO. It's the UN subsidiary agency for maritime affairs. And then I was able to do my maritime law elective here. So I teach what is a comparative law course comparing international law, Indian law, and U.S. law on 3 different topics: oil spills, insurance, and then a little bit of shipbreaking. And there are a couple of other small topics are in there, but that's sort of the majority of it. And I was doing, torts and international law and environmental law, all of which are very interesting. And there was, so the UN has a couple of universities, right? They have a major institute in Japan that one of our colleagues worked at for many years. And the IMO runs an institute called the International Maritime Law Institute on the island of Malta. And they had an opening for a position there, and I applied, and I had a very good first interview. I had a very good second interview, and they actually offered me the position on Diwali. And so I was with my wife in Ajmer, and we were doing the Diwali puja. She was like, "This is where we pray for luck. This is where we pray for prosperity." And meanwhile, my phone starts ringing, and I'm like,
so you get the good news on Diwali, but the bad news is you're having to leave
at
India.
that exact moment. I know I will no longer be living here, but I will definitely still be coming here. I mean, my wife's family is still here. And, the other piece of advice that I will give is that, never given any advice, is that, I was an intern at the IMO, and I was there for 6 weeks, and it's IMO IMLI. I mean, it's the IMO university. And they, I interviewed with the senior faculty there, and then I interviewed with the director. And then during those couple of weeks where it was like I had a very good interview, what else can I do, right? It's such a terrifying time. And I knew that I was an intern at I was an intern at the IMO. Is this the kind of thing that I should reach out to them personally and say, I'm sure you've heard about it, but it's like they're the decision maker. It's not like, so I didn't say anything to them. And then I found out, maybe not in that immediate call, but in one of the follow-up conversations I had with the head of the IMLI, was that he had asked the IMO about me, or he asked a couple of people who were still there that I worked with, and they all had great things to say about me. They all, I mean, I wrote one of the best memos of any intern in IMO history. I mean, if you have an internship somewhere, if you have an externship somewhere, write the best memo that they've ever seen, because who knows, maybe 5 years later, you'll be asking for a job with an affiliated organization, and they might ask those people, what did he do when he was there? And what are they going to say? Oh, he left for lunch early every day. Oh, he could have joked around with the other interns. Oh, and they asked me what I did there, and I said, here's this great memo that I wrote. Right, there were these, do you want to hear the details of it? No. But there was, but it was enough of a great experience where this memo that I wrote, it still lives on in IMO history and was a somewhat of a factor in me being able to get this job. And so it was like, you never know what's going to happen. 5 years, you write a good memo, and then they say something nice about you when you're applying for what feels like the kind of thing that is a dream job. So yeah, it's
wow, that's an absolutely fascinating story.
Tough to leave Jindal, but it is my life is very frequently a story of contrast, and to go from one of the most populous, and we're here in North India. It's my wife is from Rajasthan. We go to the desert frequently to go to one of the smallest countries in the world with the smallest capital in the Mediterranean is going to be quite the contrast. So I'm looking forward to it.
And we are looking forward to having the continuation of this podcast in Malta, not very far from today, because Daniel has promised me that I will be meeting him in Malta, and I'll be interviewing him in Malta. So we have had guests. We have had guests on the show attached to Malta. In fact, somebody from Malta has been on my show, Godfrey Baldacchino. And I wish Daniel all the very best, and I'm sure the last few pieces of advice that he gave us would be extremely handy, but not just scholars of law, but indeed people seeking internships all across the globe. Apart from Daniel's highly multidisciplinary hat that he's brought today, he has displayed amazing skills of getting to grasp wide varieties of human experience, getting to elevate his own consciousness. And Daniel has been a wonderful colleague to many of us. So I wish Daniel bon voyage, and I very much hope to see you soon on my podcast, Daniel. I hope you enjoyed.
That'd be great. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me. And please like, share, and subscribe. And let us all bid Daniel a happy, please come back soon, is what I would say. And thank you so much.
Cheers.